Can you imagine interviewing the world's greatest interviewer? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is the GOAT himself, Larry Grobel, for the first of a two-part series here on my YouTube channel. You can also catch Guys Radio on KCAA here in Southern California and my worldwide podcast. Thanks for your support. I have a very, very special guest, particularly for myself, your host, Robert Manni of Guys Radio, because I am interviewing somebody known as the interviewer's interviewer. He's done over 36 interviews for Playboy magazine, those in-depth biographical interviews with people like Brando, Pacino, Streisand, so many others, so many Oscar-winning actors, Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, sports figures, and so many who really didn't want to be interviewed. He's the author of 29 books, including the seminal book, The Art of the Interview, which I'm reading now, and it is fantastic, and it's a must-read for any podcasters out there listening to the show, because you'll learn a lot from the master. He's also a poet, screenwriter, novelist, teacher at UCLA. He was in the Peace Corps. He's just an amazing guy. He's from New York City, and he's been called the Mozart of interviews by none other than Joyce Carol Oates. Welcome to Guys Radio, Larry Grobel.
Thank you, Guy. Nice to be here. And I say Guy, but I'll correct you really quickly. It's interesting that you said I'm from New York City, because also
New York.
I am originally from New York, okay, but I've lived outside of New York since I was 17 years old. So in a sense, I'm but I do notice that in the back of my Houston book, the latest version, they claim that that's where I live. So,
okay. Well, you're a New Yorker, though. I can tell.
I am a New Yorker.
Because, I spent the last 30 years there before moving to Southern California. And you can pick off a New Yorker every time if you're from New York, right? I mean, it's just something in the core of the individual.
It's also the way we say orange, and there's the difference between Mary, and Mary. When I came to Los Angeles, when I went to school, they say Mary, Mary, Mary. All three are the same word.
That's true.
New York is distinguished.
Okay, let's get right to it then. Let's start talking about the process a little bit. You started out selling encyclopedias, and as we touched on briefly before we got on the air, I had to sell something called photo promotion, where you basically had to cold call people at a mall. And it really taught me a lot about people, who they are, who to talk to, how to get in the door in terms of a conversation with them. You had to go door to door with colliers. And it seemed like it was a really important time in your life in terms of kind of triggering your ability to be able to be confident and talk to anybody. Could you let us know a little bit about that, Larry, and what you learned?
Well, it was interesting. I was very young. I was 17 years old, I think, when I got a friend of mine started working for Collier's Encyclopedia, selling these encyclopedias, and he said, you should really try it. You can make $87.50 for each sale you made, and at that time that was a lot of money. And you went out in a crew of 4 or 5 people, and the guy who drove you there, he would put you out in different places. So the University of Chicago taught you how to do this. It's a psychological thing to sell encyclopedias, because you're taught that you are not selling encyclopedias. You are giving them away for free. What you're doing is, anybody who would take an encyclopedia, though, you'd want to make sure they'd want to update it each year. So what you're doing is you're selling them the update. You're selling them the yearbook every year for 10 years. So in the end, it's not a bad deal. I mean, it was maybe $80 for the yearbook, or $75, something like that. So for 10 years, you're selling them that. But it's not easy getting in the door of somebody, and you had to always have the husband and the wife there together, and you couldn't sell one or the other. And I was put in Bedford-Stuyvesant, some of the more difficult areas of Queens and New York and Long Island. And for the first 3 days, I couldn't get into a door. I'd knock on a door. I'd have that tie, a jacket and a tie on. I'd have my attaché case. I'd knock on a door. Couldn't get in. So they retrained me by having me go out with another guy. And I went out with a guy who did this. And what he did is he would take his attaché case and hide it behind a bush. And he would knock on the door, and he would just say, he would make something up to get in the house, and I saw how he did it. And I said, wow, okay. So I learned, and basically I would knock on people's door. I say, I'm not selling you anything. I'm here to see if you have certain items in your refrigerator. Now I'd always say ice cream. Do you have ice cream in your freezer? Yes. Okay. If I can see that, if you can show me the ice cream, I can give you a quarter or whatever it was. So they would let me in. They showed me their ice cream, and then I'd look around the house and I'd say, actually, I'm not here for the ice cream. Here's a quarter anyway, but I'm not here for the ice cream. I'm here because I'm looking for only 2 people in your neighborhood that we could give out a free encyclopedia. And I see by the Norman Rockwell, print that you have up on your wall, pasted with a Scotch tape, where you have this, that you are an educated person, and you would go on and on.
Right.
And then I also learned all the time that you would, if I could move a piece of their furniture from the kitchen, let's say a chair. I said, I have a bad back. Do you mind if I sit, borrow this? And I'd go in the kitchen, take the chair myself, put it in the living room. And then I'm talking to them. What happens is you've changed the environment of their own house. In the first 5 minutes you walked in, you have been taking control of their house in a sense. I didn't realize what this was going to mean later on in my life, but all of these little things that you learn, how to talk to people, how to convince them, how to manipulate conversations really, but also how to listen to what they need, all came in very handy when I started interviewing people, because especially celebrities, because celebrities have been interviewed by so many different kinds of people that I needed to distinguish myself from others. And I found that I was able to do that. And I think I give a great deal of early credit to my I think it was 3 weeks that I sold encyclopedias before I stopped doing it.
It's amazing. Imagine today, the difference between back then and today.
Knocking on doors.
you ring the doorbell now, and everybody, like Sebastian Maniscalco says, they all dive for cover. Who's there?
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
coming to get us. But so you've been interviewing, as you mentioned, celebrities, and so you interview people who don't want to necessarily. They're not really trying to sell something. They don't really want to be interviewed. Yet you manage to get them, land them, get comfortable with them, and have them really open up to you.
Right.
What's the magic there? How do you do it?
Well, that's a huge question. How does one do it? I don't know if I can. It's very hard to be able to tell other people how to do something, because what I noticed is that I knew a few other people who did Playboy interviews. They did them very different than I did. Some of them were very nervous people, and so you felt sorry for them, and you talked to them to calm them down. Others went in with I had one friend of mine. He used to always bring his wife along, and he did those kinds of things, and so she would be able to, get friendly with them. I don't know. I could never conceive doing that either. What I think, when I boil it down to, first preparation, you've got to be totally prepared when you're dealing with somebody. You have to show them that you're more aware of their past than even they remember. And when you show that, they can appreciate it. They can see that you've done your homework, that then it's not going to, you don't want to bore them. You want to make them, you want them to see that in the next couple of hours or couple of days, they will be challenged. They will be stimulated. And hopefully, they will get to like you as well. I'm not there to attack anybody. I'm there to get to know somebody. So, a lot of it has to do just with your personality. The fact is that I have had a lot of experience outside of just going to college and whatever. By being in the Peace Corps for 3 years, by traveling for a year after I left the Peace Corps around the world, and going to many countries and all the continents, it's given me stories to tell. So when, people like to hear those kinds of things. When I finally got to somebody like Marlon Brando, everybody after that wanted to see me because I interviewed him. They wanted stories about him, so that I became the guy who did that. But for different reasons, I guess I got a reputation that I was fair. Sometimes my reputation hurt me because Alfred Hitchcock in the end, and Leonard Bernstein, and Fred Astaire ended up canceling on me at the last minute after looking into, hearing that I I go deeply, let's say. Some people have called me a can opener, but
Okay.
but I don't try to trick anybody. I don't play gotcha journalism. I basically try to talk about what your life has been. What I'm trying to do in my interviews is go a little bit deeper. So
Okay.
I have read everything I can. So when I get to you, I know what you said in the New York Times, or I know what you said in certain books or certain publications, and so I'm going to ask you further questions about those things. So so people who read these interviews will get something new out of them. That to me
Got it.
was always important.
Okay, just for context for our listeners, Larry has interviewed. I started writing down all the names and I filled up a sheet of paper and had to turn it over. Brando, Pacino, Streisand, Halle Berry, Elliot Gould, Keith Sutherland, Bobby Knight, Jesse Ventura, Anthony Kiedis of the Chili Peppers, Nicole Kidman, Robert Mitchum, Dolly Parton, Pavarotti, Robert Evans, Bruce Willis, Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'll get back to the rest of them throughout our interview here. You describe an interview as not being a series of asking questions and getting answers. You talk about it as a process, as a dance, as a massage. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, Larry?
Well, I always thought that to interview someone, I think you have to have a certain kind of personality yourself. If you are an A-type person with a very large ego, and I have a number of friends who are like this, they can never do interviews because they want to be interviewed. There are people who want to be on one side of the microphone and someone there on the other. I prefer the control, of a writer than I do of wanting to be out there, talking about myself a great deal. So this is a little bit, lately I've been doing these kinds of things, but what can you
Sure.
do? If you've done
Okay.
one thing, you end up doing the other. Um, but I do see the interview as kind of like a flirtation. I see it as, definitely like a, kind of a dance, or as a ping pong, like a Lolita thing, where you're playing ping pong and getting to know somebody that way. And I've often done that. I've often played basketball with some of my people. When I went to see JP Donlevy, he had a ping pong table. I loved it. I played with him. But it's any of those things. If somebody smokes cigars and they offer you a cigar, whether you smoke it or not, say yes.
Right. Sure.
You just light it up. You don't have to, cough all the time. But I think what you want to do is just somehow relate in whatever way you can to what this person is doing. You never know when someone opens a door for you, if there's going to be someone else behind that door. In other words, when I was with Barbara Walters, she had a publicist there who insisted on being in the interview. Charlton Heston did the same thing. I never like people around when I talk. I get self-conscious of other people, and I'm trying to concentrate on just one person. And I often ask them. With Halle Berry, when I've seen her a few times. One time for Playboy, I went up to Canada, and I was in Vancouver, and I had to go up to this place where she's staying, and her publicist is there. I said, I said, I can see you. I don't want to see you. And so Holly asked her to leave. So she went into the stairwell and sat on the steps. But listen, so every time I would bring up a subject that she didn't want, she'd come, no, you can't talk about that. And so you sort of argue with the publicist more. They're the bigger problem, oftentimes. But I say you have to be like a psychologist, you have to be like a playwright, you have to be able to organize an interview. So it's not just doing the interview, because some of the interviews I did, I had 2,000 pages. Imagine with Pacino, my first interview with him, I had 2,000 pages of transcript. How do you turn that into 100 pages of an interview that will end up being 80 pages of use when they publish it? So I had to learn how to do that, and a lot of it was like I had to index stuff. So if he talked about his mother on pages 5, 25, 50, and 150, I would get those pages, just work on those, and make a good paragraph out of all the things he said. So yes, I am massaging that interview. I am it's raw clay to me, and I'm making it into a sculpture. And there are journalists who'd say, you can't do that. You have to give the exact transcript. Well, how do you do a 2,000 page transcript? It's impossible. Even in a book form, it's too long. So, there is editing involved, and that's a very key part of the interview format. Now, even with podcasts, if it's talk straight into, the air, then it's exactly how it's happening. But oftentimes what's happening is there's editing going on as well there too. You want to take out the boring stuff, because we're all boring for 80% of our time, and we all speak with uhs and thus and and we stutter. You want to take that out if you can. So you want to make it as smooth as possible, and you want to make it look like it's one conversation. So there are all sorts of challenges I found in doing an interview that involved a lot of different types of writing, a lot of different types of thinking. And the more I did it, I started doing it with Newsday. And I was doing these 3,000 word interviews with, Lucille Ball or, Linus Pauling or Henry Moore or whoever it would be, Ray Bradbury. But, I always thought, once I started doing those things, I said, God, what if I had another couple of hours? What if I could have 2 or 3 days? How would that work? How deep can you go with this form? And the only form I found was Playboy, at that time, that gave you that kind of Q&A that allowed you, to do 20,000, 30,000 word interviews. So that was a goal of mine, was to see how I could do that. And then it expanded into book form, which is what I did with James Michener or Capote or Brando or Al Pacino. I took a lot of these interviews. I tried to make them see how far I could go with it. And so it's a form that just fascinated me. I didn't know when I first thought, I only wanted to write novels. That was my whole goal. The novelist was my big hero, and I've written a few myself. But mainly I'm known for my interviews because I've done them for so many years and for so many different publications. But it's to me, everyone is different. Everyone is fascinating. Marlon Brando said to me, "How can you how can you interview actors?" He says, "Hey, they're all the same. Don't they get bored? Don't you get bored?" And I said, if I got bored, I wouldn't be doing it. But I found that each actor was different, and that was what was interesting. And everybody is different. And the challenge of the interviewer is to get to that difference, is to make them stand out and be unique by themselves. And where is that? And how do you find that?
Okay, my special guest on Guys Radio is the interviewer, the Mozart of interviewing, Larry Grobel. We're talking about his career and some tips on how to interview. And I'm nervous myself during the process, but that's okay. I'm cool. Was there an interview or something that happened along the way that convinced you that you could be a great interviewer?
One incident. I think it might have been the persistence with Barbra Streisand, because all the other interviews I did along the way, were a couple hours long, 3 or 4, even in Ghana, I did it with a famous artist there. And, I started doing that as a form, but it was 30, 40 questions. Streisand, though, was a whole different ball game, and she didn't want to do it for a year and a half or something. She finally agrees to this interview, and then she wants control. And she had given me, when I got to her house after finally getting the okay to do this with her, she handed me a legal letter with my name on it, as if I wrote it. And it basically said that she will be able to see the interview when it's done. She will get back all the tapes that I do with her. It'll be her ownership, and she can change anything she wants. And if she decides to cancel it in the end, she can. And I looked at that and I said, Barbara, I can't sign this. And she said, well, you have to. Everybody signs it when they, before I do anything. I said, well, I'm not everybody, number one. And number two is, I'm not a secretary. I'm not your secretary. I said, if you want to do this interview, it has to be clean. It has to be something that if I talk about it, I can say it's an honest interview. You're trying to make it dishonest. You're trying to demasculate me. So we fought over that. And her lawyer called, her manager called while I was there, and her boyfriend, to John Peters at the time, did he sign? And I didn't sign anything. And she finally agreed to do it. And once we started doing it, did it for about 8 or 9 months. I would go see her. We would have fights. We would argue over things. Then at one point, John Peters calls me up and says, "Can I come to his office?" I go to his office. "What do you want?" He says, "I can't stand it anymore. I can't stand this interview you're doing with her. Every time you ask her questions, and then I have to fight with her, or you make me feel uncomfortable. She's talking about Ryan O'Neal urinating in the toilet that I'm using right now. I don't want to hear this stuff." And he says, "I'll make you a deal. What are you getting paid for this? I'll double what you're getting paid. And I'll write a note that you will write her book one day and that you're her friend and all." And I just said, "John," I said, "Don't keep Barbara away from me." I said, "If she wants me to stop this, I'll stop it. But she has to tell me, not you." And that went on. It was those kinds of things that I wrote about in my memoir. Actually, I did a whole chapter about what happened behind the scenes of that interview. So I think what happened there is I Playboy kept after me too. "Where is this thing? Where is this thing?" I said, "You'll get it when I'm finished." And that was my first Playboy interview. And yet I'm holding off the editors. I'm dealing with her. I'm dealing with her people. And I wouldn't let her see the material. We fought all the time. But in the end, I did an interview that, everyone seemed to have respected. And it led to Playboy giving me the Marlon Brando assignment. Now, I was a young guy then. I had only done 3 interviews by then for them.
Wow.
And yet I get the biggest assignment that Playboy probably ever gave when it came to anyone in the entertainment business. Why did they choose me? Well, number one is because I spent all these months with Streisand and never got paid until I gave it to them in the end. I got her to be on the cover. She was the first celebrity on the cover of Playboy, and Hefner did not want her on the cover. So I had huge battles that I had to deal with to get her on the, one, because she was the one who wanted to be on the cover. She asked for it. And so there was all kinds of things that went on behind the scenes, but it taught me, that I can do this. I can deal with these people. I can deal with the very famous. I can deal with the behind the scenes. I can deal with the lawyers. I can deal with the publicists. And in the end, I can give you the results that seem to, be noticed. And so that's what happened. And then when I did Brando, I was very nervous. You think you're nervous talking to me? Imagine talking to Marlon Brando on his island, and you have no recourse to go anywhere. You can't, if your machinery breaks down, you can't buy a new machine. If you don't have enough tape, if it gets wet, you got to deal with so many thoughts when you're going to be on an island with somebody and you don't know for how long. So that all, it taught me as well, how do you deal with somebody like that, so reclusive? And again, a man who wanted control. In the end, he came to my house and he asked me, "Can I come? Can I see the interview? Can I see your transcripts?" I said, "No, I can't do that." I mean, it was like, you're dealing with people, but you also have to be very strong about your own sense. And I always had a great sense about what I was doing. I thought that the interview is an art form, not just a craft, and that you can, because I always treat things from a novelist point of view. I would say, I've always thought of myself as a writer, not as a journalist, not as an interviewer, but as a writer, going in to talk to somebody and trying to get as deep as I can. So I guess the answer would be the Streisand one was pretty important in that regard, and Brando was sort of what topped it off, that I was able to pull that one off.
Okay, as somebody who is a novelist and thinks like a novelist, when you're constructing your interviews in the editing stage, are you thinking about the classic storytelling template? What does the main character want? Why can't he get it? A series of escalating challenges and then a climax. I know you're very focused on the beginning and the end, but how do you weave in the whole novel storytelling practice?
Well,
Or do you?
again, well, I try. And the example I give in my book, in The Art of the Interview, is the Bobby Knight interview, because I felt that's like a 3-act play. It opens, with us talking, but he gets very mad at me. That, right in the beginning, he wants to kick me out.
You're not alone. You're not alone, right?
Yeah. But then I sort of calm him down, and then we start talking, and and then you started getting what he has to say, and then it builds up to another crescendo where he gets angry again, and then it calms down again, and then he gets mad, and he's throwing me out of the car, and he punches me, and it's a crazy interview. But and then finally it's like the denouement is when he didn't want. He didn't want me to be in the car anymore, and this other guy who was with us, it was also a coach. at the ending, saying, we have a very bad situation here. So why don't I drive Larry home, or Larry, you drive Bob Knight's car alone, and I'll drive Bob back. And this is with 3 hours away from his home. And so Knight finally said, no, get in the car, I'll drive. And so, I had to look at my situation, and I was afraid for my bodily harm. But with this guy, he's 6'5", he weighs 280 pounds. He's a big man. He's a crazy kind of guy. He's kind of like Donald Trump, by the way. I say the closest example to Trump is Bob Knight, as far as I'm concerned. But I remember going into the car late at night, and I said to him, I put out my hand. I said, take my hand, coach. And he looked at me like vermin, the journalists. Yeah, I'm not touching this guy. I said, just take my hand. And finally he did. And I held his hand, like in a handshake, and I gripped it hard. And he had a big hand. And I said, look, I'm not out to get you. I said, I'm not here to do harm to you. I said, you are a controversial man. You've made controversial statements. Your actions have been controversial. Some of these are true. Some of them are not. I'm trying to give you a chance to tell your story the way you see it. And I'm sorry if I've offended you, but let's be careful on our way home. Let's drive safely to get home, And then he just opened up. He just, started, you don't understand. He said, they broke my heart. They took my heart out, when they fired me. And he went into this whole thing. And I just, in the meantime, I didn't have my tape recorder on at that time because he had wanted to destroy my tapes. So I had them in the back seat. And he saw my my mind is like going crazy because I have to remember everything he's saying because this is a very important moment for this interview. And he said, okay, you want to get your tape recorder? I said, I don't want you to destroy it. He says, I won't. Okay, so I got it. And we taped all that. Well, that's your ending, after this emotional outburst. So yeah, it was constructed that way. I did the same thing with the Henry Winkler. The first Playboy interview I had published was with Winkler. The first one I did was Streisand, but that kept going. But with Winkler, here was a guy who was the Fonz, on Happy Days.
Right.
And he went to Yale, and he did little things here and there. And then he gets on this show, and he wasn't even a main character. He was a small character, but he was so popular that they turned him into a big character. And he became so big that he was making at that time more money per show than any actor ever made. Like $50,000 a show, whatever it was. And then he goes to Mardi Gras, and he's the king of Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and he's throwing the Dublins out and all that stuff. And I saw the arc of this thing. I saw that to how you take him through his life story to becoming this giant star, and to having George C. Scott come up to him and say, enjoy this because you will never have it again. In other words, you're never going to be this big again, but you don't know that when you're that big, right? And then ending with him, throwing out, being the king of Mardi Gras. I thought that there's my, the arc of this thing. Well, when Playboy cut out a lot of the stuff that I had carefully put in because they didn't see it the way I saw it. And when I got back with their edit, I said, no, it's got to go this way. It's got to go that way. And I remember my editor said to me, I never saw an interview in that way. And this is the guy who was the editor of the Playboy interview. And I said, seriously? I said, that's the way I see a structure for this thing. And he agreed with me, And so I did try to structure my interviews, but it was more subconscious than conscious a lot of the times. I basically, once you start getting start working on the interview, once you got your opening, it'll flow after that. What does that person say? If he mentions something about his early life, you got to go find the material about his early life for the next question. And you move it along that way. So it looks like a conversation. And if it's a good interview, it'll also have some kind of arc to it.
Now, again, my special guest, Larry Grobel, world's greatest interviewer. Let me throw out a couple more names of folks he's interviewed. Heath Ledger, Goldie Hawn, Harvey Keitel, Mae West, Ava Gardner, Jerry Lewis, George C. Scott, Elizabeth Hurley. Was Mae West, was she as a wink during your interview as she came across on screen? And that was your first big celebrity, right?
Yeah, she was. I never interviewed Heath Ledger, by the way. I would have liked to, but I never did. Yeah, all the others I have.
Okay.
Mae West, when I went to see Mae West, First of all, that was the first assignment that got it all going. It was when I got to Los Angeles. I left New York. I was writing for Newsday. I was doing profiles. They came up with this idea of doing household names, interviews with household names. And they said, we'd like you to do Mae West. I said, is she still alive? I had no idea. They said, and they said, how do we know? You're the one. How do I get to it? He says, you're the one in Hollywood. You'll have to find her. So I found her. She had Paramount. I talked to the publicist. I got to see her. And I remember I stopped at a flower shop on my way to her place, and I bought her flowers. And the flower shop guy says, I said, oh, these are for Mae West. He goes, oh, that Mae West doesn't like these kind of flowers. She likes these kind. I said, okay, great. So the guy knew. Right? I got the right flowers. They were much more expensive, by the way. And then, and when I got there, I take it, she came out and she was small. She was like Dolly Parton, very small woman in a sense. But when you have the hair, and then the heels, you gain 8 inches or so. Anyway, so I got there and I take out my tape recorder. She says, oh, no, you can't do that. Can't use the tape recorder. I got my first interview like this. And she says, I can't use it. And I was like, what? And she says, someone once did tape recorded her and they made it into a record because she had that very famous voice. And they turned it. So I said, look, I'll put it. I'll write you a note that I won't do that. I won't do it. And then she says, no, you can't use it. I said, So I took out. Luckily, I had a pad with me. Luckily, she talked very slowly, and also that she had her boyfriend who was a muscle guy there. One of her bodyguards, and that's one of the few cases I was glad he was around because I would bring up things to her and she would talk and yes, that happened or whatever, and then the guy would say, Mae, you told a better story than that. And he'd egg her on and then she would go into it. And I'm writing like crazy as I can do it. What I remember very strongly is I had to go to the bathroom about 2 hours into this interview. I had to go pee. And I wasn't going to get up unless she got up, and she had great stamina. So for 3 or 4 hours, she didn't move and just told her thing. But that was it was a difficult interview in the regards that I couldn't tape record it, and ever since then I've taped every single thing I've ever done. But I've run into that situation with Ray Stark, and I've run into it with George C. Scott, where and Jerry Lewis, where they didn't want to tape, and then when they do, they tape their own tape. They have their own tape recorder going because they want to make sure you don't screw around with them, and that's fine with me because I don't.
Okay. Two-part question, Larry. One, when you first meet somebody that you're going to interview, how do you establish a quick connection with them? And secondly, some of these interviews that you did over the years, Brando, Pacino, Streisand, they went over periods and periods of interviews. How do you maintain the flow from each segment of those interviews?
Well, your first part of the question is how do you establish a rapport, basically?
Yes.
And you either do or you don't. I did not do it. I failed with Robert Mitchum when I first met him. Now later on, I saw him from my Houston book, and but when I went to see him, he's an anti-Semitic man who made anti-Semitic statements, who offended me a number of ways, and I actually got up and left after a while because it just wasn't working.
Sure.
So sometimes you have to have your own sense of self, basically. But I find that the first 2 minutes of any interview is the most important, because what happens is that's when the door opens and you're going to, or they come down the steps or whatever it is, like with Lucille Ball. I remember I saw her legs first when you're in the house, and it's how you greet them, how you look at them, how you smile, and the eye contact you make. They're either going to see that, yes, this guy's intelligent, or this guy's friendly, or this guy's prepared, or whatever it is that I'm trying to show. And hopefully all three, that I'm ready to do this. And I'm basically a friendly person. I have stories to tell. Sometimes I might be able to say right up front, drop a name by somebody. Oh, Al Pacino wanted me to say hello to you, blah, blah, blah. Al, yeah, we became friends after that kind of thing. That could happen. But you do drop names at times, and you do, and other times you don't. Ray Bradbury was not interested in anybody but himself, and he was a very good interview. But if you started going off a story on your own, he didn't care. His eyes went blank, and you'd see that. So you'd go back to, just keep it to him, keep it all on him. People like Brando, took me 3 days before he let me tape him. So for those 3 days, I told him my stories, and he would laugh. He got a kick out of that. So you just don't know. But that's why I really think that it's like a tabula rasa. Every time you go in, you don't whatever you're expecting, it's not going to be that way. It's going to be something different. Chris Walken had a rented house. He wanted to do the interview standing up in the kitchen. He liked to cook. So he was most happy doing that. He would make me a coffee, and we would sit there, and stand and talk. I wasn't prepared to stand the whole time, right? And look at my notes and but I did, because that made him comfortable. So you really have to, as I said, being like a chameleon, you have to mold yourself to the other person. Let's see, the second part of the question was how do you
continuity?
Continuity. Well, look, when I first went to see James Michener, I had prepared 500 or 600 questions. Now, if I prepare that many questions, I'm probably going to ask 3 times as many, right? So anyway, because he wrote about all these things, about all these countries, all the things from the dinosaur up. He had a lot of knowledge. I wanted to feed into that knowledge and see what where I can go with it. So when I went to Florida, and he says we go into his little office, and he showed he had a desk. Was a door. He always just had a door as his desk, and then he had two drawer filing cabinets underneath it, and a chair, a rocking chair. So he told me to sit in his rocking chair, right? And he sat in the other chair, and so okay. So he said, well, I think we can do this tomorrow. I met him the night before we started talking, and he said, all right, come tomorrow at 8:00, and we'll finish up by, and it'll be good to talk to you. And I said, I don't think we can do this in one day, Mr. Michener. I said, I'm very prepared for this, and I've written a lot of questions. And he just said, well, let's just see how it goes. So I went to see him at 8 a.m. We talked till noon. We went for lunch, came back, talked till 5. So we talked about 8 hours. And then he said, okay, come back tomorrow at 8. I went back tomorrow at 8. And then we did it for 8 more hours. Then the next day, 5 days, 8 hours each. That's 40 hours of tape right there. Amazing, right? So, but what was the continuity? Well, it was picking up from where we left off. You know what I mean? It was basically, okay, we're stopping because we're tired. Most people don't talk the way he was willing to go for that long. Most people will go for 2 hours, 3 hours, and then they get a little tired, and that's fine. And then I say, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. But I just, if we're talking about your childhood, and we say, well, why don't we stop here? It's a good stopping point. Fine. Then we'll pick it up tomorrow. So to me, the continuity was never hard. It's just the hardest part with someone like Streisand was regaining her trust. Every single time I went there, she would look at me suspiciously, and I picked up on it. You get the vibes, and I finally said, Barbara, either we're doing this or we're not. I said, it's exhausting for me to have to regain your trust every single time I come here. I said, you've agreed to do it. Let's just do it. Let's don't make me spend a half hour, coddling you and making you feel like you like me, so then we can keep going. Let's just do it. Let's be professional about it.
Okay. Go ahead, Larry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but that was the case. With Brando, it was like he only wanted to talk about Indians. So I talked to him about Indians. I prepared so much for it, but I knew I had to do other stuff with him, right? And he didn't want to do that. So the first 6 hours only about Indians. The next day we picked it up, more about Indians. The next day picked it up. Well, by the first, after 8 or 12 hours, he was a little tired of talking about Indians, and that was my strategy. Then I could throw in, when you did On the Waterfront, and you did that famous scene. So anybody could do that. That's a da. And then he said, "Oh, you got me talking about acting." And I'd go back to the Indians, and then, an hour later, I'd throw in something else about Marilyn Monroe, and then he would talk, and then he would do the same thing again. That was what that was all about. So as far as continuity goes, I just try to, basically, if I have 100 or 500 questions, I know where I've stopped. I know that night when I go home, I look over all these questions. I know what we've got to, what we did, what was important still, what we should have covered which we didn't get to. I will circle that. I will highlight it if I need to, and then know where I want to pick it up. So it's a lot of the research and the work at night as well. After being with the person for a day, I will work on it at the evening. So when I go back the next morning, I am, picking it up where we left off, but I'm adding to what we've already talked about as well.
It sounds like there's a lot of, or some aspect of gamesmanship that goes on when you're
Totally.
interviewing these very powerful people, where they say they want to be interviewed. And I remember in a reading about Harrison Ford, he really didn't give you too much, but he was very clever as to how he responded. And Steve Martin didn't want to talk about the past or the future or the
Right.
present, and he wasn't that funny until you got him going. So how do you manage the gamesmanship? You have to be really, I guess it sounds like, Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, you prepare your questions, but then you have to go with the flow.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When I went to see Henry Moore, Henry Moore was one of the greatest living artists at the time. He was in Forte dei Marmi in Italy. I went to his home in Much Haddam in England. I saw how he owned 11 of the 12 houses on that block. He was a very wealthy man from his sculpture, and then I go down there. I had, you know, I was really out of my league, I thought, with dealing with a great artist, because, what do I know about sculpture? What do I know? Well, I studied in the States before I flew over there. I had prepared and prepared. And then I got one of those notebooks that could flip upward like this. And I wrote my questions that I typed them up in a small enough to fit that notebook. And I pasted them into the notebook. So I had all these questions like this, and I filled up that whole notebook with questions. I read those questions over and over and over again. I got to, when I got to England, and then I took a train down to Italy, and in the train, all I'm doing is reading the questions. And so by the time I got there, I get to his house. He's in this backyard. He's looking at a book of drawings, and he's a small man, and he was just an older man. And I said, Mr. Moore, pleasure to meet you. I said, what are you looking at? He said, oh, I'm just looking at these drawings. He says, yeah. I said, do you always look at art books? He says, you can tell great artists. If you really want to know who the great artists were, you could tell them by their drawings, not by their sculptures or paintings, I think. I said, really? I said, well, who are the great artists in your opinion? And, it was Michelangelo, it was Rembrandt, him, right? He gave me 10 artists, including himself. And I started going from there, right? I never once opened my notebook. I mean, I had studied it and studied it and studied it, right? But here we were just having a conversation, and then he told me to go to Carrara. He says, that's where he got his marble, and it wasn't that far from Forte dei Marmi. So I went to the marble site, where they were cutting up marbles, and that was amazing. And then I went back and I saw him again the next day, and it was like that can happen when you're really well prepared. You may never use your questions. And when I finished with him, yeah, I looked over the questions I didn't get to, but it was okay because I got to also everything we talked about was so fascinating, and it was on topic. I wasn't telling him stories out of my ass, basically. When I was in Ghana, blah blah blah. No, I was sticking to art and his art, and it was fascinating. So again, preparation is really important, but you have to be able to go to listen, because if you're listening and they take off on a different subject, you go with it. The Steve Martin interview was really tricky because Steve Martin, he's a kind of a genius. I mean, you look at him, he was a great comedian, very good writer,
Good actor.
Good screenwriter. He's got a lot of piano, the banjo. He's a musician,
Novelist.
and a novelist, right? But he is a terrible interview. He's like, he doesn't want to give you anything, and especially with a comedian. When I was doing Robin Williams, or if you do what's in Mel Brooks, there are certain comedians who are very good. They're on. Not Steve. Steve sat behind his desk, and it was like, whoa, it was really difficult to do, and I couldn't get him out of the desk. I said, you want to do this? You want to do that? No, he just wanted to do it there. And I've done 3 interviews with him, and I've had dinner with him. I've been to his house. I brought Joyce Carol Oates once to his house, and David Mamet is there. We had a very interesting, life after the interview. But doing the interview itself with Steve was really difficult, and I knew when I was editing it that I had to find whatever I could make funny, whatever I could work on it. So I made it much funnier in a way than it was. And his manager called me up and said, you really, I can't believe you got this out of Steve. He says, they really liked the interview. Why? Because it wasn't really what happened in a sense. It was just taking stuff from all over and trying to make it work. Don't forget they put him on the cover of Playboy wearing a diaper. It was the New Year with two, like bringing in the baby. So he's willing to go visually very funny, but verbally it was always a struggle with him.
Okay, Larry Grobel. For right now, last question was: what was some of the self-discovery that you got from all these interviews with these very amazing, powerful, creative forces that you spoke to?
Well, I think I learned that I can do these things. I learned that you always. I don't think I'm as smart as Linus Pauling, who won 2 Nobel Prizes and in science, or Richard Feynman, who won the Nobel Prize in physics. I mean, I've been with some giants, Pavarotti, Capote, or Norman Mailer, or Saul Bellow, who I adore his work. I'm not intellectually on their level, but when I'm with them, I am, because I'm prepared. And I have to convince myself that I am the equal to Linus Pauling, or I am the equal to Richard Feynman. And maybe when I come home, I go, I pull that one off, right? Or with Brando. But I think it's the idea that I have the confidence that I can do it. So I feel that I could talk to anybody, and I may not succeed. I don't know, but I've yet to meet my match in that regard. I failed with Mitchum, but that was because he was a nasty guy, and I walked out of it. I just, why bother with something like that? But I can't think of other people that defeated me in a way. So I think I got a great deal of self-confidence from being able to do these things.
And it all started.
And having editors that I respected asking me. I was like the first one. Playboy would always call me and say, "You want to do so and so? You want to do so and so?" And so I knew that I had risen to a level where I could do that kind of stuff. So I guess that's might be an answer.
It is, and it all started with selling those encyclopedias. So don't knock salespeople. It really teaches you a lot about humanity.
Absolutely.
Okay, Larry, we're running out of time here. Do you want to talk about your website? There's so much more I have, but for right now, where can people find out more about you? Again, the seminal book is The Art of the Interview. I know you've got 2 books of short stories. You've got a whole bunch of other stuff out there. What do you want to tell us?
Well, I wrote another book, a sequel to The Art of the Interview, called You Talking to Me, which is 120 lessons that I learned from the people I've talked to, and that's kind of been an interesting book for me. But I've written 2 novels, Catch a Falling Star and Begin Again, Finnegan, and then I wrote these 2 books of short stories. One is called The Narcissist, the other is Schemers, Dreamers, Cheaters, Believers. And those are 35 stories written during the pandemic. I'm writing another book of short stories because I've written 16 more since then. But I've written, my memoir is You Show Me Yours. So I've just got I got 29 books. All of them are available at Amazon. All you do is go to Lawrence Grobel, my name, and you can see all the books. You can click on any of those books and read the first 10% of any of those books for free. So you click on Look Inside, you'll see, oh, you want to continue? Then you get the book. If you don't, you've seen enough. My website is my name, lawrencegrobel.com, LAWRENCEGROBEL.com. And all the books are shown there too. And you can click on there to get to those. And there's all sorts of other stuff there. My books have been translated into 14 languages, including China and Japanese and, Croatia. I mean, it's been some of the interesting in different places. So, and you can see all the different covers on the books and all. I put those up in the website. So that's about as much promotion, I guess. I'm on Facebook. I do Twitter. But I don't do as much social media as I probably should. But and I have an article coming up in AARP in June.
Oh, fantastic!
About my relationship with my grandson, who is only 5.5, and he's turned out to be quite a prodigy as an artist. And so I wrote it. They asked me to write about that, and I did that recently.
Fantastic. Well, Lawrence Grobel, thank you so much for being on Guys Radio. You're a guys guy and you're really an inspiration. So thank you.
Thank you.